This week on Quality Digest Live, we chat with Dr. Randall Bell about the enduring cornerstones of long-term success.
Plus, a brief history of lean. That and more when we come back. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for March 10th, 2017. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest publisher, Mike Richmond. Well, we hear all the time about the labels that marketers assign to various groups of consumers based on those consumers' demographics, interests, and other commonalities. Several of these are fairly well known. For example, you have your baby boomers. Those are the folks born in the baby boom of the decade or two after the Second World War. In this grouping, my partner.
When you put it that way, it doesn't sound so great.
Well,
way back after the Second World War.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
1946 to 1964, I think it was. Yeah, something like that. You fall squarely in that, Dirk.
Yes,
and when I say squarely, Dirk,
squarely.
Yes, that's right. So he falls squarely into that. When it comes to when it comes to technology, some people are considered early adopters as another grouping, meaning that they're always the ones who want to try out the latest gadgets and gizmos, and that would be our boss, Jeff Dewar. Kind of falls into that one. Then there are identities focus on things like purchasing. For example, my wife Terry and I are known as Dinks. Did you know that, Derek? We're known as Dinks,
no, which somehow it seems to fit.
means double income, no kids. We get a lot of solicitations for restaurants for some reason. I don't know why that is.
Two dogs.
No. Double income, double dogs. Yes, no kids though. But now, according to a press release appearing on the Conference Board website, a new consumer group is making a big impression on marketers. The news item, which we linked to in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest, discusses a report released last month by the Demand Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank operated by the Conference Board in conjunction with Nielsen. The report defines the new group with the moniker Connected Spenders. And if there's any phrase that can get marketers' hearts aflutter, other than Dinks, of course, it's one that combines the ability to connect to buying opportunities with the desire to spend. Connected Spenders.
There we go.
Would make marketers really happy, I would
Yes.
think, to have connected spenders. Well, identifying consumers as connected spenders is more efficient than considering them based on arbitrary upper class, middle class, and lower class dividers. The key defining factors for this emerging new group are engagement with new products or offerings, the ability to locate these purchasing opportunities, and having the internet here, of course, is critical, and at least the perceived sense of discretionary income. When you think about it this way, a connected spender, say in Africa, who earns, let's say, $1,000 a month, may be a much more valuable consumer for an online marketer, maybe than an American retiree worth upwards of $1 million. Upper class, middle class, and lower class really don't apply in this paradigm. I mean, what he's saying there is like somebody who's motivated and has discretionary income within their market and has access to the internet, maybe a better target than somebody who has more money but isn't as involved or as engaged. That's an important distinction there. Okay. And it really can't be stated clearly enough that internet access is really the single most important factor here. The Demand Institute report indicates that more than 2 billion consumers are expected to gain access to the internet in the decade to come.
Wow.
When you consider this huge, monstrously untapped market, it's clear that the influence of connected spenders is just going to continue to grow in the coming years. 2 billion people are still not on the internet. They're going to be on the internet by 2027. So that's a lot of people potentially to market to. Even if they don't have a lot of money necessarily, they may have discretionary income they can allocate. So those are connected spenders.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, and obviously, like you said, internet is a big part of this. Mm-hmm. And of course, as internet and network accessibility rolls out even in developing countries, like you said, you mentioned Africa, that is potentially a market.
More and more people. Yeah. And again, it's not necessarily upper class, lower class.
It's right. It's just, do they have the money to spend and do they have access?
The discretionary income, do they have access? Do they have desire? Do they want stuff? Some people maybe, like say if you're a retiree, you may not need or want as much. You may just be happy with the way you're living, but people that are in emerging markets may have more of a desire for things. Who knows? Cell phones or sneakers or whatever it may be, that makes them connected spenders.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Well, when a man-made catastrophe happens, let's say something like Chernobyl or Fukushima or even the Challenger disaster, it's often we look to either the overly simplistic explanation to assign blame, something like, well, they should have seen it coming. What does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
To the complex explanation where there's a lot of hand waving and whiteboards and equations and people drawing on the whiteboards trying to explain what happened. But while both of those are both the simplistic and the complex explanations they may have some merit, the root cause of man-made catastrophes may be something really as mundane as attitude. The breakdowns in simple habits and daily routines, the basics like humility and integrity and communication and positivity. Our first guest today is Dr. Randall Bell, author of Me, We, Do, Be, The Four Cornerstones of Success. He has consulted on many national and personal tragedies, including the attack on the World Trade Center, the Flight 93 crash, the BP oil spill, as well as the John Benet Ramsey and O.J. Simpson cases. And his take on root causes of some catastrophes might surprise you a little bit. Dr. Bell, thanks for joining us this morning.
Dirk and Mike, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Hey, well, as we have just heard from your bio, this is pretty interesting. I didn't know there was a job category for this. You have been, or still, I'm assuming, a consultant to disasters. And why are you called in exactly?
Well, I'm called in primarily as an economist. I calculate the damages. So when you hear on TV that the damages were X million or X billion dollars, I'm the guy with the calculator computing those damages. But I learned a long time ago that there are actual people behind the headlines. And so I actually went back to school and studied sociology to understand the interrelationship between the sociology and the economics of the disasters.
Well, Dr. Bell, your title of your book is Me, We, Do, Be. And maybe you can walk us through and explain the title a little bit for us.
Sure. I'm going to use a little reference point here. Me is our mindset. That's everything we're thinking philosophically. It's everything that we believe philosophically. It's everything we feel spiritually. That's me. We is our relationships, our connections with other people, whether they're healthy or whether they're toxic. That has a big role to play in our success, our level of success. Do is productivity. In economics, we call that land, labor, and capital. But what we're really talking about is taking care of our money, taking care of our health, taking care of our homes and businesses. That's do. And then B is a game plan for the future. It's basically our legacy, our setting our goals, time management, those types of things.
Now, in your book, you have a quote that I kind of picked up on. You write, quote, "Like the cornerstones of a building, there are basic foundational elements we must maintain to continue operating on a high level. These basic elements can be summed up as humility, integrity, communication, positivity, and productivity." So is it true to say that man-made, or let's call them avoidable catastrophes, can be boiled down to a lack of some combination of those basic elements?
Yes, you can always, at least I've been to more disaster sites than anybody, I think, in world history, 7 continents worth of, and 50 states worth of disaster sites. And I'm not trying to oversimplify things, but it can be said that ultimately I can identify the me or the we or the do or the be cornerstone that was missing. You need all 4. And if you have all 4, you have a solid foundation. With a solid foundation, you can build anything you want, or you can recover from disasters as well with a solid foundation. But ultimately, you can connect the disaster to a fault in one of those 4 areas.
And can you give maybe an example, a simple example that some of us might be familiar with, where you could tie it back to something like that?
Sure. I really started making a big connection between all of this when I was in Chernobyl. I had a letter of invitation from the head of Chernobyl. I went out down a country road to the guard post where they guard Chernobyl. It's highly radioactive. And I went into this kind of military post. I immediately noticed that all the Soviet guards there had machine guns over their shoulder, so I was on my best, behavior. And it was about lunchtime, and they started breaking out salami sandwiches and passing it around and offering me some. And then the other guy started breaking out vodka. And, I'm not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but vodka and machine guns literally in both hands was kind of a cultural problem. And I thought, you know what, the light bulb went off, and I said, it's not a coincidence that the world's biggest nuclear accident occurred in a culture where this was okay to literally have a machine gun in one hand and a bottle of vodka in another. And that's where I started the whole experiment of studying the sociology behind all these things.
That's a
great story.
That would be a little scary.
Yeah.
Well, when you've consulted on disasters involving companies, were CEOs surprised that it was their shortcomings on these, let's face it, basic elements that may have caused the problem? I mean, were they expecting you to come up with something maybe more complex?
Well, a lot of people think that complex problems, require a complex answer, and that's not always true. Sometimes the answers are pretty simple. And with the CEOs and others that I deal with, it depends on the CEO. Some take responsibility, and they have a heart, and they want to make right whatever problem was caused as a result of their organization. Some are very, in a very defensive posture. You go from person to person to kind of figure that one out. But ultimately, I think the most intelligent way to go about it is to really assess your me, your mindset, your we, your relationships, productivity, and your game plan for the future, and really see what's solid, what needs some help, and then go to work to build that to get your organization back on track.
And Randall, I think this falls into the me part of this, because I think there's maybe what Dirk was referring to there with maybe the big bosses at some of these companies, CEOs, there's a lot of ego involved, right? I mean, so the idea that some of these solutions might be relatively simple, is that always easily accepted by CEOs?
Not always easily accepted, but again, some of these people are very very egotistical, and I there's strategies to deal with that, and others are very down to earth. I just had lunch yesterday with Mrs. Fender, whose husband Leo Fender started Fender. He didn't have a problem with ego at all. He took responsibility for everything. He lived actually in a mobile home. His passion was making great musical instruments. So there's an example of a CEO that built an iconic empire without ego. And yet we see a lot in today's society. We see too much ego, and I think you're right. That becomes a big problem.
Okay, well, Dr. Randall Bell, author of Me, We, Do, Be, The Four Cornerstones of Success. Thanks for joining us this morning. If you want to get a copy of Dr. Bell's book, there is a link underneath the player page that will link out to, I believe it links out to Amazon, and you can take a look at his book down there. Dr. Bell, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Dirk. I really appreciate it.
Hey, no sweat. Take care.
Thanks, Randall. Good seeing you. Good stuff there, Dirk. I mean, I think that's really an interesting idea.
Right.
That I mean, there's these relatively simple psychological underpinnings of a lot of these disasters. I mean, that was a great story.
Right.
I never heard that story of the vodka and the machine guns in Chernobyl. I mean, but that's really eye-opening. I mean, I think that really illuminates what he's saying there, is that sometimes disasters do just happen. I mean, sometimes there's accidents, is for acts of God, whatever. But there also are many times there's these psychological underpinnings, these things, cultural underpinnings.
Cultural stuff.
That makes things happen. It makes things more likely to happen. Or if they do happen, they won't be controlled as well. And I think that's a really interesting perspective on it. And certainly from the perspective of, say, of risk management, to look at yourself and say, well, if X were to happen in our organization, do we have the cultural protections in place to make sure that it doesn't get out of control? So. Good stuff there. All right, we're going to move on now, because I have an interesting article as well I wanted to cover by one of my favorite authors, Kevin Meyer. The piece is called A Short History of Lean, again by Kevin Meyer, and it appeared in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest. You can actually see it right there, in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest. Well, there's, in my opinion, Dirk, there's nothing better than an article that teaches you something, right? I mean, you come out of it, you'll learn a little something maybe you didn't know before, and I think that Kevin Meyer's article, he always does this, but this particular one really delivered for me, and I love these little factoids and things that you learn. I did not know. I learned a couple things in this article. One of the things I did not know was that maybe the world's first lean engineer, Galileo Galilei, in more than like 500 years ago, in the 16th century. Galileo Galilei apparently was employed as an engineer for the Venetian shipbuilding industry. They were having, I guess, problems rolling ships off the line, and they brought him in as an expert scientist and an engineer to look at their process and to redesign their process and smooth it out, make it more efficient so they could roll more ships off the line. But I did not know that. Wow. That's a great thing. According to Meyer, that's really the first example, one of the first examples in history of lean practices being employed for the good of manufacturing. I also didn't know that after he invented the cotton gin, that Eli Whitney actually pioneered the use of interchangeable parts
Oh.
to deliver muskets. He
Muskets,
delivered
right.
10,000 muskets to
Right.
the U.S. Continental, well, I think it was the U.S. Army, right before 1800. And because of the way he designed that, it was really, really affordable. So,
Yeah, well, and because up to that point, if you couldn't pick up somebody else's weapon and guaranteed that your bullets or
whatever
would
work
fit,
with it,
yeah, right,
or
exactly,
if you had a lot, whatever it was. I mean,
Yeah.
the interchangeability of the parts, which now we're taking for granted, was an amazing breakthrough. Saved the U.S. Army a lot of money at that time when they didn't have a lot of money, not like now. But but so I didn't know that either. I learned that from this piece as well. So the article kind of goes on and with examples from history, and there are examples from the expected sources. I mean, he brings in Henry Ford, of course, like we always talk about Henry Ford many times in these types of articles. He talks about W. Edwards Deming and his work in Japan. I actually didn't know that Deming apparently first went over to Japan like on an agricultural mission.
Wow.
He mentions that, and I didn't know that, and right after World War II. Amazing thing that I learned there too. So those are the kind of the expected sources and some unexpected sources. I mean, he talks about Benjamin Franklin in this piece and some of the things that Ford learned from Franklin in terms of being thrifty and using your inventory, using your stuff. And he talks about training within industry. I didn't know that TWI was really based in World War II on getting female engineers, female workers on the line up and running quickly. I didn't realize it was so much of a gender disparity there during World War II. And the whole Rosie the Riveter thing led, apparently, from what Meyer says, led to this training within industry movement, which is now making a big comeback. So, I mean, as the piece kind of moves along, you really get a point that Meyer is underscoring here, which we take somewhat for granted, and that's that lean is really about value. Lean is really about maximizing value for the organization. And I think that much of that is done through things like minimizing waste and enabling people or satisfying customers. And all those are kind of limited frames in which to look at the core issue, which he talks about and runs through this entire history lesson he gives us, which is that lean is about, enhancing value, the value stream. And that is something that, maybe was taken for granted somewhat. I think it was in American industry after the Second World War, certainly, where the focus was much more on maximizing profits and making sure that the U.S. companies were pushing product out the door, whereas Japan didn't have that ability. Japanese companies were really about maximizing value and looking at things like value streams and making sure that work was done in a way where it was set up in a way that it could be efficient, it could make profit. So, I mean, value is an interesting perspective, but even back to Galileo Galilei, it all was about the outputs of value, and that's what this history lesson was really all about.
Interesting.
But again, going back 500 years,
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, it's
That's
like,
crazy.
you think about that. I mean, we're now in 2017. Galileo Galilei lived in the 1500s, and even back then, there was a sense that somebody who had an engineering perspective on this could look at a system and say, okay, we've got to get more value out of this.
Right.
In this case, it was basically throughput. They were trying to get more ships off the
throughput,
line. But somebody with that engineering background could look at this and say, well, let's look at this system, let's break it apart and fix it and get more value out of it. That was the lean lesson that I think we learned from this piece. Really, really good stuff from Kevin Meyer. He always has good stuff. And
Who would have known that?
I didn't.
I
Like I say,
just
I
learned
learned a
something.
lot from
Never
that article. So read that one and learn some stuff for yourself. Maybe it was a really, really good piece.
All right.
Well, that's right. That's me. I'm sorry. We always do that. We do
know,
that
it's like-
every other thing. And we
I
didn't
almost
do that
forgot
on
to start the show,
I
so it's-
know. Last week too we did that. All right.
Kind of stare at the camera for a while.
Thank you, Derek. All right. Well, we're going to turn our attention now to one of our favorite topics here at Quality Digest, and it is, and I'm sure it's high on your list as well, audits.
Yay.
Just saying the word, I'm sure it brings up fond memories of preparation and focus, introspection, examination, right?
Right.
Or something like that. Well, audits actually can foster and engender all the reactions that I just mentioned, as well as a prevailing commitment to continuous improvement and performance excellence if, and only if, they're done with a proper intention. And that means going into the process with a real curiosity about how someone else views your system. Whether that someone else is a third party, say from your friendly certification body, or an internal auditor from your very own company, the procedure really should be the same. You want honesty and you want feedback that's going to help you improve, right? Well, you also want to properly capture all that critical information and use it actively in your performance improvement initiatives as well. So the question is, how do you do all that? And what are some of the tools that would maybe make it a little bit easier? Fortunately, we're joined today by a man who can help us make sense of these questions and find some answers. He's Tom Middleton, Solutions Architect for Sparta Systems, and he's with us now via Skype. Tom, welcome to Quality Digest Live.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you. Apologies for the long intro there, but I want to set it up for you, right? You wrote an article for us this week, and it was called The Most Important Questions to Ask About Your Audit Program. That's probably a pretty good place to start. So what are some of those specific questions other than the general ones that I just mentioned above?
Well, two come to mind, really, that have a lot of relevance to what we're talking about. The first one is how curious am I, excuse me, as a person and as an individual. And the second one kind of leads into that is curious, or how much curiosity is built into my audit process or program. And as an auditor, do I really have a desire to learn about the management system or process that I'm auditing? Being authentically curious really puts a person on the right path to delivering a value-added audit to your customer. I just heard you mention the value-added audit, and as a third-party auditor, we were always looking for ways to make our audits value added. So whether that customer is your organization's executive leadership or someone else, if I'm just going through the motions of like collecting data and talking to people along time-worn paths and doing the same thing at every audit, I'm not sure that I'm myself up to really learn anything that can help my organization achieve its objectives. And that second question is how curious or how much curiosity is built into my audit process. Is my audit program set up to capture audit information in a way that can be used or can be useful later? A lot of times the information gained in an audit, including the positive stuff, there's a lot of positive stuff that comes out of an audit. It's not just about where we're going wrong and what we're doing wrong and writing nonconformances. That kind of stuff gets relegated to a binder somewhere or a box or a cabinet. And the only information that really gets reviewed or disseminated is the negative stuff or the nonconformances. And there's a lot more information that goes into the output, if you will, of that would be useful to an organization.
Well, you mentioned curiosity a lot, Tom, but that's a different perspective, I think, than the one most folks have when their QMS is being audited. I got a feeling many just want to get through the audit and find a way to pass. Yeah. But what do we lose when we focus so narrowly on simply passing the audit and getting it over with?
Yeah, or getting it over with. When I was a third-party auditor, we used to kind of have a joke about, my favorite day of the audit is the last day of the audit. So, we're not exempt from that, even as auditors, from that kind of thinking. So, and that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind when I think about what we lose by just focusing on that narrow bandwidth, of passing the audit or getting done with the audit is perspective. There's more to why we audit than just passing or making sure that we're compliant to the requirements in the standard or the standards. The bigger and the more important question is, are we meeting our objectives? The people that we're auditing that are responsible for the day-to-day success of an organization or an enterprise, they're interested in more than whether or not they're compliant to the ISO standard or the FDA regulations, although that's important and they know it. They want to know if the business is headed in the right direction. Where's their company or their enterprise vulnerable to regulatory actions, for instance? Or where is the company, where they're exceeding? Are these tasks moving us forward in a timely direction? And you might see a theme there that enterprise leaders and even mid-market leaders, when they're running a company, they want to know, are we making progress towards our goals? Are we it's an overused term these days, but are we winning? Are we making the social impact that we want to make? These are the things they're concerned about. Something else that we can lose is a sense of mission or purpose, and if I could be so bold as to say a sense of adventure in our everyday work. Curiosity in auditing can sure open a door to making real change. If we're just interested in passing the audit, auditors can miss things that can be hidden from someone who's just going through the motions. Curiosity about how things work and maybe how people think can take you in directions and provide value that hadn't been seen before. But I guess with that whole idea of curiosity, there comes kind of a warning to keep your curiosity credible. Curiosity that turns into just snooping around because you can, that can actually damage your credibility as well as your objectivity. So when I think about adventure or going on a hike somewhere, you're walking along some unfamiliar pathways, you want to be sure that you want to be careful about where you're walking and what you're walking into. And so, there's some caution there about being curious. You want to, I'm kind of jonesing on that, keeping your curiosity credible. You always want to do that.
Well, Tom, you guys, in the interest of full disclosure, Smarter Systems, you guys offer automated systems to help with some of this management we're talking about here. But some might say, well, automated systems are great, but we're doing just fine with email or with spreadsheets or even documents and binders. So talk a little bit about what automation can get you real quickly in this process.
Yeah, sure. And I can tell you that a competent and curious auditor is not going to take very long in your management system to show you that the devil's in the details. And I'll tell you, to be honest, and I know this from experience, some of the most frustrating nonconformances you can get in an audit are those nonconformances that get issued against detail stuff like, did the audit plan and schedule get reviewed and approved on time and by the right people? Were corrective actions issued in a timely manner after the audit was completed? Did we select the right auditor? Or if we're using subject matter experts, did we pull from the right pool in that area? Those kind of findings are okay for the audit program, but unfortunately, the more you get those kind of findings, the more frustrating it can become, because those kind of findings don't really help advance the cause of the organization that's being audited and their objectives and their needs. So an automated system for audits can do things like monitor assigned tasks, like review and approval, task completion and timing, as well as they can also issue notifications and alerts that if you're using just a paper system, that kind of stuff can get lost, to be quite honest, or overlooked while it's sitting in a folder or a binder or a cabinet somewhere. Spreadsheets and binders can also they can really severely limit the visibility to audit information, and that's why we audit. I mean, to gather and pull together and make decisions about information. And if that stuff's hidden away somewhere, it's very hard to get to. So with the right system, you can give certain people even permission to view that audit information from your system, things like that. So, this saves time and effort when the audit manager could be doing things like planning for the next audit and reviewing findings and information. They can be preparing for the next audit instead of somebody coming to them and asking them, how did we perform in this audit in this area? And you're like, well, I'll get back to you in a couple of hours while I go rummage through all the paperwork. And I'm speaking from experience. That's happened to me many times.
Right. Hey Tom, we only got a couple like a minute left here. So in 45 seconds, maybe you can tell us what we're going to be looking at on the webinar. We're doing a webinar together on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So give us a real quick high level
Sure.
on what that's going to be.
I am looking forward to that webinar. I think we'll have an informative time on Tuesday. First and foremost, everyone without exception is going to discover that I am not perfect. I'm a transplanted Southerner, so I like to tell stories on myself. So folks are going to learn some things from my mistakes. We're going to talk some more about curiosity and its value to what Peter Senge calls in his book, Fifth Discipline, the learning organization. This is all very, very important stuff. So we'll take also a walk through the entire audit process, and we're going to explore ways that an automated system can keep you in a good place when that third-party auditor comes knocking on your door. So I'm looking forward to Tuesday.
Great. Well, that's it. Yeah, Tuesday, March 14th is the date. 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Make sure you check that out and register for it. You can register, I think, in Tom's article. Right below
And
the article.
there's also a link underneath the player page as well.
That's right. So, Tom, thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
All right. Well, that is the end of today's show. So, like we just said there, be sure if you're interested in this webinar, which I think you would be if you are doing any kind of third-party auditing, you want to watch that webinar. Why you should automate third-party audits, as Mike said, this coming Tuesday, March 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, presented by Tom Middleton. Sparta and I will be there as well, just hosting and feeding him questions. Thanks also to Dr. Randall Bell for showing up today and talking to us a little bit about kind of the nature of catastrophes. And what the cornerstones of a good company are in his book, Me, We, Do, Be. There's a link to it out underneath the player page. Click that. Go out and check out his book.
That's right.
That is it for today.
You guys all have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
So long.
Bye.